Imagine you've gone through your usual nighttime routine of closing all the doors in your house before you go to bed. You're slightly OCD, so you quadruple check that every door is closed securely. The kitchen door, the living room door, the bathroom door, the spare bedrooms, and then finally your own bedroom door before you turn the lights out and go to sleep. You wake up the next morning and the first thing you notice is that your bedroom door is wide open. You walk out into the hallway and you notice that every door is now wide open. Every single door. Well, apart from the front door and back door, which are still locked. And the windows are closed, meaning that nobody broke in. Let that sink in for a second. This is Severed Soul, and today we're talking about the haunting of YouTuber Loey Lane. So, Loey's home is 100 years old, nearly. Well, it's there or thereabout, and it's everything she could have possibly dreamed of living in her favourite city, Los Angeles. She describes it as the most beautiful little cottagey home, but in the middle of one of the busiest cities in America. It is the perfect house for her. Now, she goes on to make a point of saying that the cottage always felt weirdly maternal in a way that she couldn't really explain, aside from just saying she feels like the house has this overarching feminine energy. Now, I'm a man who lives on my own in a small, very masculine flat with a praying mantis as a pet, so we are polar opposites. So yeah, this is quite interesting to me. So, Loey says she agreed to buy the cottage without even seeing it in person. She viewed it on a video link sort of thing and decided there and then that this was the place for her. But then when she finally arrived at the cottage for the first time, she said it was really dramatic, but the moment she walked through the door, she just felt this immediate, overwhelming connection to the place, two energies coming together like a magnetic force. Well, she didn't say that. That's just the impression I got from what she was actually saying. I've got something in my eye. So she fell to the floor in floods of tears. Happy tears, obviously. Not what the fuck have I done sort of tears. And so it was like a match made in heaven. But aside from the connection of energies between Loey and the cottage, she was also picking up on a very different energy. Pretty much from the moment she moved into the cottage, she started to sense a presence, or presences, in her new home. The feeling when you know you're alone, but you don't really feel like you're alone. Does that make sense? And as much as Loey was fascinated by the paranormal, much like myself, she didn't really want to face the reality that she was living with ghosts. It's kind of like going to the zoo, I think. I love lions and tigers and bears. I love seeing them. Obviously, I'd rather see them in the wild, not in an enclosure, but I definitely wouldn't want a tiger jumping on my bed. That's kind of how I feel about ghosts. Now, Loey mentioned that just before she moved into the cottage, she'd been on a paranormal road trip across North America with two of her friends, which sounds freaking awesome, I might add. Not jealous at all. Anyway, while she was in New Orleans, she stayed at a Hilton hotel. Now, I'm not sure if this hotel was an older hotel and was bought by Hilton later on, but anyway, she said the night that she stayed at that hotel, she had the worst nightmares, the worst sleep paralysis she'd ever experienced. These weren't just your average bad dreams. She felt like there was an energy in that room that was causing these episodes to happen. Definitely not a nice place to be. So, when she moved into the cottage and she started to experience some creepy shit going on in there, part of her thought that maybe she'd brought some bad energy with her from the road trip. Maybe something had attached itself to her and made itself comfortable in her new, old cottage. Well, at first, whenever anything paranormal occurred in the cottage, it would happen to other people who were staying there, not Loey herself. And here's the first example of that. So, not long after the trip, Loey had two of her best friends over to stay with her, and they were called Eleanor and Emma. Loey had recently adopted a whole bunch of kittens, which had been found abandoned. Now, she already had a couple of cats and dogs, so every night she would shut the new kittens in one of the spare bedrooms to keep them separate from the dogs. Not that the dogs were particularly aggressive or anything. I mean, they already lived with cats. But, just while they were all getting used to being around each other, it was the safest thing to do. So, anyway, Loey, being slightly OCD and paranoid about something happening with the dogs and kittens at night, she would shut the kittens in this room and shut the door. But not only would she shut the door, she would quadruple check that this door was closed and couldn't possibly be opened by the kittens. And she always did this with every door in the cottage. Before she turned in for the night, she would routinely walk around checking every door was properly shut. And this totally resonates with me. And I don't even have pets, well, apart from the mantis. But I just can't stand doors being left open at night. Anyway, back to the story. So, one night, Loey's friend Emma woke up with one of the black kittens sitting proudly on her chest. Now, at first, she just kind of thought, oh, that's cute, the kitten loves me, kind of thing. But then it occurred to her, hang on, my bedroom door was closed. How did this cat get in here? So the next morning, the girls were talking over breakfast, and Emma casually mentions that Hunter, the little black kitten, had managed to get into her room. And Loey, who was just about to take a bite of toast, paused. And she's like, what? That's impossible. I quadruple checked every door before I went to bed. There was no way any of the kittens could have gotten out of that room. And Emma's like, yeah, that's what I thought. And my bedroom door was also fully shut too. So the girls were like, okay, that's a bit creepy. How the fuck has that happened? But Loey specifically was really confused. She was very protective of her pets. She 100% made sure that all of those doors were closed and the cats were safe. Well, not long after this, Loey caught all the kittens on camera fixated on something in the room that Loey couldn't see. And you can see the cats are all kind of following this same thing with their gaze. But I always try to veer towards the rational, logical, sceptical viewpoint, and it's entirely possible that it was a tiny fly or something that the kittens could see, but Loey couldn't. But then, Loey heard a loud thump from over by the window. And again, all the kittens looked over towards the window at exactly the same time, like they'd all been startled by this sound. Towards the end of COVID, once all the lockdowns etc. had been lifted, Loey went to see some of her family in Michigan. Obviously, because of the lockdown, she hadn't seen them in well over a year, her grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins etc. So she was really desperate to go and see them all. Meanwhile, back at Loey's cottage, Loey's friend Grace had come to stay for the week to look after the pets and, just make sure the place is safe and secure in Loey's absence. So, Loey had said to Grace, you can have free reign of the cottage. Eat what you like, drink what you like, you can do whatever the hell you like, but I need you to promise me you'll do this one thing every night before you go to bed. And of course, Loey's polite but firm request to Grace was every night before you go to bed, please make sure you shut the kittens in the third spare bedroom and shut all the doors. Please, this is important. Make sure you shut all the doors properly. So, one night, while Loey's catching up and having fun with relatives, Grace is back at the cottage, walking around making sure the kittens are secure in the bedroom and all the doors are shut tight, and then she turns the lights out and she goes to bed. Well, the next morning, the two girls are talking on the phone and Loey casually mentions that she had the weirdest dream last night. There was a man and he was walking through the cottage, and that's all she could remember. There were no other specifics, just that this random man, who she didn't recognise, was walking through the cottage. And Grace is like, shut up, shut the hell up. You're not going to believe this. She's like, I wasn't going to tell you this because I knew you'd freak out, but this morning when I woke up, my bedroom door was open, and I swear to you 100% I shut the bedroom door, fully, heard the latch click and everything. And Loey's like, okay. And then Grace says, but that's not all. When I walked out of the bedroom, all of the doors were open. Every freaking door in the cottage was wide open, and I know I shut them all properly. So now both girls are getting goosebumps, and actually so am I just telling this story. Now, the front door was still locked shut from the inside, and all the windows were closed, so nobody had broken in. Also, nothing had been taken, so it definitely wasn't like a burglary or anything like that. But also, yes, you could explore the possibility that one of the dogs could have opened the doors. Maybe, somehow. But they never did that when Loey was there, so why would they do that now? And some of the handles in the cottage are like the round ones that you have to grab and twist. And well, bar some sort of miracle, dogs' paws just aren't capable of doing that. So yeah, another very creepy incident in the cottage. Now, Loey said, and this is another thing that totally resonates with me. When she first moved into the cottage, she was like really on top of the cleaning and the tidying, and everything had its place. She was very particular about where things belonged. But then, as time went on, she became a bit more relaxed if things weren't put back where they belonged, and the cottage wasn't perfectly tidy sort of thing. Like, she'd go to bed and think, that can wait until the morning sort of thing, and, well, that's exactly like me, guilty as charged. I think when you live on your own and you have to keep on top of everything yourself, you can kind of fall into more of a relaxed attitude, so to speak. Anyway, Loey started to notice that when the cottage was, let's just say, less than perfectly tidy, her belongings would randomly start to disappear. We're talking keys, purse, handbag, and get this, an entire box of clothes that she specifically wanted to wear for a video had completely disappeared. Like, she knew where it was, she knew exactly where she'd left it, and the next day, it turned up in that exact spot. Now, at first, Loey put these kind of things down to forgetfulness caused by stress. You know, she'd just moved from Georgia, it was the first time she'd lived on her own, it was also the anniversary of her father's death coming up, and she'd renovated and put his place up for rent, so I can really see why she would attribute the things going on in the house to stress. It makes sense. In fact, she was like really, really stressed. She said this was the most stressed she'd ever been, to the point where she was like literally starting to lose hair. But then she started to put two and two together and realised that these things only seemed to happen when the cottage was less tidy. Well, it was around this time that Loey had a guest over to the cottage. Now, she didn't give any names, but she did say that this person was incredibly spiritual and very in touch with the paranormal, like a bit of a psychic medium, I guess you could say. Well, when this person arrived, Loey welcomed them in, took them to the living room, offered to get them a drink, etc. You know, all the usual formalities. But she said that this person was unusually quiet. Like, this person would usually have a lot to say, but she definitely noticed that they were very quiet. So the guest sat down on the sofa, and Loey went into the kitchen to make them both a coffee. Well, when Loey came back into the living room, she hadn't even sat down yet, and she had a cup of coffee in each hand, and the guest was sitting there, white as a sheet, and says, "Loey, there's a man in your house." And Loey is like completely taken aback. She was not expecting to hear that. The guest went on to say, he's a very strong masculine presence. He's very protective of the property, and he doesn't like me being here. He doesn't like it when you have strangers over at all. Obviously to him, they were strangers. To Loey, they were her friends or guests. But as this male presence became aware that the guest could see and acknowledge him, he asked her to pass on a message to Loey. Well, actually 2 messages. The first message was to always keep the gates shut tight. So the gates to the property, he wanted Loey to always make sure that she closed them properly when she came to and from the property. The second thing was that he wanted her to keep the house tidy. And actually, this bit made me laugh a little bit when I read it, because I can just imagine my nan, bless her. If she saw my flat sometimes, she would definitely have some choice words for me. Now, Loey had never really mentioned to anyone that things were going missing, etc. around the house. And why would she? She just presumed, as we said before, that she was just being forgetful due to the stress. But now that she's hearing this, it's kind of starting to make sense. Things only happened when the cottage is a mess, and this male presence is now telling her that he doesn't like the mess, so this is his way of telling her to keep the cottage tidy. And the only other information that the guest got from the man was that at some point over the last 100 years or so, he had been a resident of the house, and that he was protective of the property and by association, whoever lived there, i.e. Loey. So, in a strange kind of way, Loey found this revelation sort of, what's the word? Not reassuring. Maybe comforting. Yeah, comforting. That this strong masculine presence was looking out for her. Although, he wasn't quite the strong masculine presence she initially thought, and I'll explain why that is shortly. So all in all, at this stage, Loey didn't feel threatened by the presence. He was just protective over his space and wanted her to tidy up once in a while, which I guess is quite reasonable. Although I do think it might help slightly if he'd stop hiding her things. One day, Loey had woken up late, which was really unlike her, but we'll excuse her because she was sick. Not COVID related, but she definitely felt really sick. So she wakes up late and she's really fuming at herself because she never wakes up late. You know, she's got all these pets that are depending on her for breakfast and to be let out for the toilet, etc. In particular, she had an old dog called Riley, who was 11 years old, who really depended on Loey to let him out first thing in the morning. Actually, she'd started laying out a patch of artificial grass by the back door for him to use if he really needed to go. So she wakes up in a panic, like she really needed to let the animals out to do their thing. And when she walks out of her bedroom, still sleepy, still sick, yawning her head off, the first thing she noticed was the breeze. Like she could feel this subtle breeze blowing through the cottage, but had no idea where it was coming from. And that's when she noticed the back door wide open. Now, we've already discussed how OCD Loey is when it comes to making sure all the doors are closed and locked at night. So this was a massive concern for her, obviously. And she's thinking, fuck, has someone broken into my cottage? Her first thought definitely wasn't that this was paranormal in any way. So she grabbed her baseball bat, grabbed her phone and called one of her friends. Now, another thing that Loey had noticed was that the alarm system hadn't been triggered, which it most certainly should have. And more to the point, nothing was missing, nothing had been taken and nothing was out of place. Also, only the dogs had gone outside. Like literally, it was as if someone had opened the door for the dogs to use the bathroom, but wouldn't let the cats out. So the door can't have been open for that long because the cats definitely would have gone exploring. That's just what cats do, isn't it? I can just imagine this ghost standing at the door like a security guard. You can come out. You can come out. No, not you. Use the litter tray. Okay, you can come out. No, not you. And this was really the only explanation left after all the more logical explanations had gone out the window. So Loey quietly said thank you to the presence, let the dogs in, closed the door, made herself a coffee, fed the animals and went back to her room to try to get over this sickness. Now, let's talk about witches, because I didn't realise that being a witch is actually a thing that people still practice. Well, apparently they do, because Loey is a practicing witch, and this is entirely relevant to the next part of her story. So up until this point, Loey had become aware of the male presence in the house, but she'd never really attempted to reach out to him or communicate with him. But this one night in particular, for some reason, the presence, or the energy of the presence, was just really noticeable, to the point where it was like overwhelming and undeniable. So, in Loey's witchy work, witch practice, witchcraft work, whatever it's called, she does some deity work. Now, I had no idea what that was, so I had to do a little bit of research. So, my Google AI overview states that deity work in witchcraft is a collaborative personal relationship with divine beings to foster spiritual growth, gain wisdom, or enhance spell work. I mean, it sounds good to me. Who wouldn't want to foster spiritual growth or gain wisdom? Anyway, so when Loey felt this overwhelming energy, initially she thought that maybe it was her deity coming through. So she brushed it off and just tried to ignore it, but the more she ignored it, the stronger the feeling became, until finally, the salt lamp in her room started to flicker on and off. Like, if you're just going to ignore me, I'm just going to annoy the fuck out of you until you acknowledge me. Well, it worked, because Loey lit a candle, grabbed her witchcraft pendulum and proceeded to ask some questions. So, Loey had never done this before. This was literally the first time she'd ever used a pendulum to try to communicate with a spirit. And well, she didn't really know what questions to ask at first, apart from the usual, like was there something he wanted to tell her? Was there something she needed to know? So initially, the pendulum was kind of chaotic, swinging all over the place, and wasn't really following any regular patterns. But then she asked if it would be better for her to use a spirit box to communicate, and there was like a sudden shift in the pattern of the pendulum. This time it was swinging back and forth, like this was a definite yes. Now, Loey said she really didn't feel like using a full spirit box, so she decided to use an app called Necrophonic. And to be honest, this is something I've literally never heard of. Loey had used this app before, but she'd never really had great results with it, so she was always slightly skeptical. However, this experience totally changed all of that. So the app works by using a sound bank. There'll be loads of words in the app and the spirit or entity can communicate by using these words. And Loey didn't film the session. In fact, she's quite private about her deity work, or at least she was up until the point of telling this story on her own channel. She never even disclosed the name of her deity. Unfortunately, we don't have any footage of the session, which would have honestly been so cool, and you're about to find out why. So the session started initially with Loey communicating with her deity. Now, she wasn't really expecting to communicate with anyone or anything, so when the deity started responding, she was a little bit taken aback. Almost a little bit panicky, like, should I be worried? Is there something wrong? Like she was literally having palpitations. And the deity responded, no, you're safe, I love you, which must have been comforting, but then at the same time, pretty fucking terrifying. But pretty quickly, the voice that was coming through on the spirit box changed, like it was someone else trying to communicate, and it mentioned 4 names. Paul, Henry, Lucy and John, and it kept repeating those names over and over again in this other voice. And Loey was really confused. She definitely didn't know anybody by those names, so she had no idea what the spirit was talking about. And that is when the voice changed again. But this time, a deep, monotone, strong masculine male voice started to talk. A coincidence that the spirit in her cottage is a strong masculine man? And with this spirit, Loey had like a 40-minute conversation. Not like a flowing conversation like two alive people would have, but there was definitely 40 minutes of back and forth with this male spirit who told Loey that his name was Paul. So Paul had lived in the flat at some point. He was 40 years old when he died, and when Loey asked him if he was the man that her guest had seen and if he was the one protecting her flat, he said yes, he definitely was. And with this spirit, Loey had like a 40-minute long conversation. Not like a flowing conversation like two living people would have, but there was definitely 40 minutes of back and forth with this male spirit, who told Loey that his name was Paul. So Paul had lived in the flat at some point. He was 40 years old when he died, and when Loey asked him if he was the man that her guest had seen and if he was the man that was protecting her flat, he said yes, he definitely was. Now, Loey said that while she was communicating with this man, Paul, she kept envisioning flames everywhere. Like in her mind, everything was just engulfed in flames. And at first she's thinking, is this just her mind's reaction to what's going on? Is it like symptoms of stress? Like she didn't know what this was. And then Paul's voice came through on the box, stronger than ever. Fire. So Loey drops the phone and she's like, fuck, fire. So she runs to the kitchen to make sure all the gas outlets are turned off and looks for anything that could cause a fire. But everything just looks calm, to be honest. She couldn't really find anything that might cause a fire. It did then cross her mind that maybe Paul was trying to tell her that this was how he died, or that maybe there had previously been a fire at the cottage. But she didn't ask him because, well, he already had a hell of a lot to say. So she heads back out of the kitchen into the living room and picks up her phone. And immediately the voice comes through again and says, you see? And Loey's like, see what? I didn't see anything. And Paul responds, the kitchen, it's dark. Now, remember earlier when I said that Paul might not have been the big, fearless guardian type figure Loey hoped he was? Well, this is why, and it's actually quite sad. So Loey's like, yeah, it's 9 p.m, it's dark outside and the lights are off, so yeah, it's dark. What about it, sort of thing. And Paul responded by saying, "Don't like, turn lights on." So it would appear, ladies and gentlemen, that we have a sweet ghost who is afraid of the dark. And how sad is that? I've never even considered that maybe spirits could be scared of the dark. And why not? It makes perfect freaking sense, doesn't it? And Loey's like, "Well, I really don't want to leave the lights on all night. Do I have to leave them on all night?" And Paul said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, can I get a nightlight or something?" And Paul said, "No." Like, he really did not want to be left in the dark at all. And then Paul said something really fucking strange. He said, "glass of milk." And Loey's thinking, what the fuck? What would a spirit want with a glass of milk? And she asks him to confirm, "Do you actually want me to leave you a glass of milk?" And he says, "Yes." And so she does. She leaves him a glass of cold milk on the table, and Paul said, "Thank you." After this, Loey told Paul that she'd leave the light on that night, but they'll have to come to another arrangement moving forward. And she bought like some neon lights in the kitchen so he wasn't left totally in the dark at night. She told him she loves the cottage and she plans on being there for a long time, so she's happy for him to make his requests known, but she needs him to stop taking and hiding her things. And in return, she'll work as hard as she can to keep the cottage as tidy as possible. And Paul simply replied, "Okay." Since this conversation with Paul, two more things happened. One night, during a full moon, Loey was doing some of her witch work, and she started to communicate with Paul on the app again. But he just seemed to be waffling a load of nonsense that she couldn't really make any sense of. So she tried to communicate with him again with the pendulum. And she was asking him why he hadn't been able to move on and find peace and, move into the light. But she didn't really get a straight answer from him. And that very night, she had a dream of a smartly dressed man in a top hat just sitting in the kitchen, just kind of as if he was watching over the place. Obviously, she presumed that this man was Paul. And the second thing that happened was a lot more crazy, so to speak. So, Loey had misplaced her purse. Had she? Had she really? Or was Paul just up to his old tricks again? Now, this purse is usually hung up by the front door on a piece of string, and she would never leave the cottage without it because it had her driver's licence in it, etc. And she was stressing in case she got pulled over for some reason. Well, she searched that cottage from top to bottom, and she couldn't find that purse anywhere. So, out of sheer frustration, she slammed her bedroom door shut. And what should fall off the shelf in her bedroom, the shelf that she'd literally checked at least 4 times? Obviously, it was the purse. And as far as I'm aware, there have been no more major incidents at the cottage since then. And that's all we have time for today. I hope you enjoyed Loey's story. If you did, I've got plenty more just like it. So click the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, turn notifications on, and if you've got a story you'd like me to tell on this channel, then speak up in the comments section. Thanks for watching. I'm Severed Soul, and I'll see you in the next one.